Back about the spring of 1994, I went camping with a small group of friends in Georgia, kind of off the beaten path. It was a nice place, primitive, but definitely defined large, heavily wooded sites. Upon my arrival, one couple, good friends of mine, were there already. As I came in all jovial and enthusiastic, I immediately noticed something was off. My friend Kate was making big eyes at me, and as I looked around, I saw my friend, her husband Ted, standing by the tents with some dirty-looking dude. Kate then whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "This dude won't leave us alone." I tried to get what was wrong, but from what it sounded like, he was just a kind of lonely guy out in the woods by himself, and we were just unlucky enough to be his next-door campsite neighbors. As the day went on, he was trying to insert himself into everything we were doing, and not just that, but everything he did was just off. For example, as we were preparing for our big dinner, which is always a highlight of our trips, he brought over his cooler to show us his dinner plan, which was literally a steak floating in bloody cooler water with a couple of beers. By this time, two other friends had shown up, and they were just like, "What the?" As we were setting out our food, sort of buffet style, as everyone had pitched in to bring and prepare something, camping fabulous for the meal, here he comes with his chair, all wet and muddy like he just crawled up the river banks. The sites were far enough apart that we had time to do a quick huddle and decide that Ted, who was a large dude and who made first contact, would tactfully and politely ask this guy to please respect the boundaries of our campsite, and that our meal had been carefully planned and we had been looking forward to getting away, hanging out alone with our tight-knit group. Surprisingly, he seemed to get the picture and actually seemed a little embarrassed. No hard feelings, see you around kind of vibe. We were all relieved and actually felt a little pity for the guy. As it got dark and we were all stuffed, sitting around our campfire, having partaken in various calming vices, suddenly, out of the darkness and into our firelight, comes our neighbor. We immediately go silent as he proceeds to join our circle and plop down in front of the fire. As he pulled his knees up to his chest, we all noticed at once that he held loosely in one hand a giant Desert Eagle pistol with his finger resting on the trigger. We froze and just stared at him for what seemed to be an eternity. Then he said, just as casually as could be, "Anyone want to check out my piece?" We just stared in disbelief. Then my buddy Dave just pipes up and said, "Nope, no thank you." To which the dude just casually took the gun and said, "Okay," got up, and sauntered back off into the darkness. He didn't seem to have a flashlight or anything, and it totally freaked us out because we just didn't know where he was until about a half hour later when his campfire suddenly was ablaze with 7-foot high flames, and there he was, hopping around the fire, naked, as far as we could tell from that distance, jumping around the fire with a gas can, periodically dumping more gas on the fire. It was about a half hour of intense insanity, and just like that, it ended. We didn't hear a single sound. As I remember, we all stayed up pretty late, and that night, I don't think any of us slept without one eye open. The next day when we all got up, there was no sign of him, except for a melted red and yellow plastic gas can. We spent another night there and ended up having a great time, but I'd be lying if I said we weren't all a little on edge for the remainder of our time. I was camping at a friend's family property with a group of friends. They had a huge, dingy shop full of old tools and old furniture that was super creepy. Dirty floor, clown paintings in the loft. We stayed up late drinking by the fire, and I was the last one awake. I went to go pee on the side of the shop and stood about 5 feet away, looking inside through the window. There was a fluorescent light on, and I noticed what looked like a piece of paper or dollar kind of floating around. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was moving in a very flowing figure 8 pattern that was very rhythmic. It reminded me of dangling a carrot. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds, which felt like forever. Then it quickly floated back to the corner of the shop where it was dark. There was also a wood chair near the corner that added to the creepiness. I sat back down by the fire to finish my beer and have a smoke. No one else was awake, so I played a game on my phone for a while. I noticed my friend Mark pop out of his tent to use the restroom, then go back in to go to sleep. I decided sleep sounded good, so I went to my tent and fell asleep. The next morning, we were having breakfast, and Mark said, "I saw you guys sitting by the fire super late. How late did you stay up?" I told him it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. Then he said, "Who was up with you?" I told him I was the last man standing. He said, "I got up to use the restroom and saw you on your phone and 2 people over your shoulder watching you play." He said one person looked bigger, so he thought it was one of our friends who was a bigger dude. He said the other person was taller and skinny, but none of us are noticeably tall or skinny. This freaked me out. Well, we still camp at that property once a year, but I don't go in the shop, and I go to sleep whenever my wife decides she's tired. Picture this. You're out in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest population center, just got done putting your fire out, and are getting ready to go to sleep in your tent. The sun has been down for almost an hour. The whole time you've been at this location, you haven't seen any animals. Then, as you are trying to sleep, you hear crunching leaves and footsteps around your campsite. You grab your air horn in case it's a black bear. They scare off pretty easily, so it shouldn't be too hard. But you also have a can of bear mace just in case things get ugly. You slowly and quietly unzip a tiny part of your tent door so you can peek out. You see a silhouette, casted by the moonlight, of a human standing near where your fire was, with what looks to be a rifle held in their hands, as you see them gently kick to ashy remains of your campfire spot, then looks around your site and over your tent before just casually walking off, slinging the rifle over their shoulder. If you know a lot about animals, their actions can be mostly predictable. But people? Out in the middle of nowhere? With a gun? Snooping around your spot, not even 7 feet from you. That is more terrifying than any animal. I'd rather wake up to a grizzly snooping around my camp. I'm not an outdoorsman, but I was camping with a group of friends. We were in high school on spring break and decided to all go camping for a couple of days. This takes place in the late 90s. We had 3 tents, a truck, and an SUV. There were 8 of us the first night. We drove far from the main road towards the mountains. We found what looked like a good campsite, flat ground, and a good-sized field next to it. Now, as teenagers, we wanted to have fun, so we had alcohol and weed. The first night, we all got wasted. One friend pissed himself and another threw up on the hood of another friend's truck. He scratched up the paint trying to clean it up. The second night, there were 6 of us. There wasn't much partying going on, and everyone except a friend and I stayed up cooking food over the fire. Munchies. We were cooking, and he's telling me a story, and as he's telling me this story, I hear a scream in the distance. I stop him. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "No," he replied. "All right, it could be that I'm a little buzzed." We finish eating and decide to call it a night. On the way to our tent, I hear the scream again, and it's in that open field. My heart stops immediately. I get goosebumps, and I'm terrified. My friend turns around, and I ask him, "Did you hear that?" "Yes," he replied. Now, to describe this scream, it sounds like a woman giving off the most blood-curdling scream, extremely high-pitched and loud. Now me, feeling a little buzzed, I'm thinking of this ugly chupacabra alien-looking creature just staring at us in the distance, like it's ready to run up and take us out. We immediately jump into the tent and remain quiet. Our breathing is quiet, but we are on alert. This is twice I've heard the scream. We hear it again. It's much closer now. My heart is racing, and I think this might be it. All of a sudden, another scream, but from the opposite direction. Oh my God, there are two of them. The screaming continues from both directions, probably every 20 seconds or so. It's like they're talking to each other, planning on how to take us all out. We're surrounded. We finally whisper to each other, "What do we do?" It's probably been a good 2 minutes since we jumped in the tent, but it felt like an eternity. There's another friend in the tent passed out. He never wakes up. My friend remembers he has both sets of car keys. He quickly presses the panic buttons. We let the car alarms go off for a few minutes. During this time, we couldn't hear any screaming. We can see the car lights flashing against the tent. When we thought the creature got scared away, we stopped the car alarms and both yelled loudly, "Get the hell up, everyone." We unzipped the tent. He has already unlocked the car doors. We see people emerging from the other tents in a panic. We all jump into one of the vehicles, start it up, and lock the doors. Everyone is asking, "What's wrong?" We explained the screams and asked them if they heard it. They all replied no. We explained what happened, and I think because of how terrified we were, they believed us. We all agreed to leave the camp and drive to one of their houses and spend the night there. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking the creature somehow attached itself to the car or followed us home just waiting. Daylight couldn't have come quick enough. We had some breakfast, told his parents the story. Well, now they think we are crazy. We decide to head back to the site. We arrive, and there are large paw prints around the campsite. One of my friends suggests it could be mountain lions. The most terrifying part is when looking at the paw prints, our shoe prints had walked over the paw prints. Now, we were careful not to disrupt the scene when we returned. This means when we heard the screams, they may have been closer than we thought. After the car alarms scared them away, we stepped over their paw prints. I looked to the empty field where I heard the screams and just got the chills. I essentially grew up in the woods, so I've had my fair share of run-ins with wild animals, including, but not limited to, very large insects, venomous and poisonous snakes, coyotes, wolves, and a big black bear in the middle of the night. However, none of those matched the scariest moment. When I was like 8 years old, I think, me and my cousin were wandering around deep into the forest behind my grandparents' place, and within those woods were a few really steep ravines that would dry up in the summer that we would climb up and down. We were on a small strip of land between two of these ravines, and then my cousin saw something on the other side of one. She looked for a while before getting this terrified look on her face and grabbing me and saying one thing, "Gun." I looked, and sure enough, there was a gun. And at first I didn't see the person holding it because it seemed like this guy was wearing a full camo with pieces of a ghillie suit. Now, hunters aren't allowed in these woods. It's private property, and someone would have to go way out of their way to hunt here. And in our terrified little brains, we didn't stop to consider what kind of gun he was holding or where he was aiming it. So you best believe we ran really fast. There was a ravine between where we were and the way back to my grandparents' place, so we both essentially threw ourselves down it, rolling down one side and climbing up the other faster than we ever had before. We sprinted the whole way back to our grandparents' house, and when we tried to tell the adults, they only half believed us, but I still remember this so vividly, and it was by far the most terrifying encounter I ever had in the woods. What's that line about humans being the real monsters? Anyway, looking back now, I know that it was just a hunter who was breaking the law by being where he was. However, before my time, those same woods were a crime scene at one point where my uncles found a disposed body. Putting those two stories together always gives me chills when I think about it. Boy Scout Summer Camp, 1997. A place called Camp Tamarack. I was 13 years old. Our troop's campsite was the furthest away from the mess hall, so a group of 3 of my friends and I were looking for a shortcut. Our campsite was on a sort of elevated, flattened off ridge. We stumbled upon a somewhat skinny and overgrown game trail that dipped down into a lower lying, densely wooded area of the camp. According to our little brochure map of the somewhat vast property, there was nothing there, no buildings, campsites, or maintained trails. The soil was a bit soggy, so I assumed it was a floodplain. We descended down into the thick woods and discovered the area was a veritable labyrinth of game trails, so we kept exploring. About half a mile in, we took a smaller, fairly overgrown side trail, then another. We rounded the corner, and what we stumbled upon stopped us dead in our tracks. There was poop and poopy toilet paper everywhere. I'm talking hanging from tree branches 8 feet up, and multiple tree trunks splattered with what appeared to be gallons of butt mud. It took us several seconds to comprehend what we were looking at, and even then, it made no rational sense. Normally, someone would have busted out laughing, but none of us said a word. We were far too horrified. Finally, one of my friends broke the silence and shakily whispered, "Dude, what the hell?" It was like stumbling upon a crime scene. A disturbing amount of crap was splattered everywhere, all over the surrounding ferns and other plants, the bushes, high up on tree trunks, in a huge radius. What seemed like an entire roll worth of crappy toilet paper hung from the surrounding branches, gently wafting in the faint summer breeze, and on some of it you could see blood stains. It legitimately looked like some kind of unholy crap bomb went off, like an entire beach ball filled with a foul mix of chili mac and vegetable soup violently exploded. And I can't emphasize the sheer amount of it was the most disturbing part. It was obscene. There was so much of it everywhere. It was so confusing, and our petrified brains struggled to merely comprehend what we were looking at. It shattered our fragile eggshell minds. The sheer abomination we beheld kind of broke our brains. From that point forward, we would never be the same. And then the smell hit us, an overwhelming, putrid, festering wall of stench that made our eyes water and took our breath away. It defied description, but if I had to describe it, it was like sticking your head into a pit toilet But it also had this underlying reek of decomposition, like roadkill. The fact it was a hot summer day made it all the more worse. I started gagging involuntarily, and there were an ungodly amount of bluebottle flies swarming around, a cloud of what had to be hundreds, possibly thousands of them feasting on the poop. Their collective buzz was deafening. Finally, one of my friends broke our horrified trance by yelling, "Let's get out of here." We turned and fled, running all the way back to camp. When we got back, we were all genuinely traumatized. We tried to tell some of our friends, but they just cackled at the absurdity of such a claim and refused to believe us. A couple of the guys I was with, when we found the masses of poop, tried taking some of the unbelievers back to the site to prove its existence, but I refused to return. Oddly enough, they couldn't retrace our steps in the labyrinth of trails and failed to relocate it, so the others continued to insist we made the whole thing up. But we knew what we saw, and what I beheld that day, it's almost like it gave me some mild form of PTSD. To this day, it gives me the willies. I have goosebumps right now as I talk about this. When I try to explain the how, I'm at a complete loss. If that came from a single individual, just how? How is such a thing possible? And if it came from more than one individual, well, the implications are equally horrifying. Because why? I will never have the answers. The scene I beheld that day defies all logic and reason. It legitimately scarred me for life and will, in all likelihood, haunt me until the day I die. Back in 2021, my husband and I were camping in Wyoming at the Boysen Reservoir. We got really lucky and were able to book a beachfront site directly leading to the water, but the downside was that it was very, very far away from the other campsites. We were essentially isolated from everyone else. At the time, though, it sounded like a dream come true. The thing about Wyoming is that it's so desolate to the point where it's pitch black and eerily dead silent once the sun is gone. We set up our camp, enjoyed our fire, but shortly after that, a random SUV with blacked out windows came driving down our road and into our site. They drove towards us. My husband tried to wave to them in case they were lost and needed help, but instead they ignored us and drove down to the beach, stayed there for 5 minutes, turned around, and went back up the way they came. We immediately got a bad vibe. My husband told me to throw everything in the car, and he kept shining a flashlight towards the beach because we had a feeling they dropped someone off to watch us. After we packed up, we got in the car and hauled ass. Lo and behold, the same car drove back into our campsite, and when they saw us leaving, they actually started chasing us. Mind you, the roads in Wyoming are bumpy and unkept when you're in the wilderness. On top of that, enormous wildlife that wanders in and out of the streets. My husband said, "I have to go fast. Are you okay with that?" And I said, "Just go and get us out of here." We were easily going 80 miles per hour down these windy roads and even through a canyon. They were on our tail for about 10 minutes until we lost them after passing through the canyon. This was the most terrifying experience of our lives. We think about it to this day and wonder what could have happened if we didn't listen to our gut at that moment. Let me know in the comments if you have any creepy or scary camping experiences. And don't forget, subscribe for more hair-raising content. Thanks guys, bye.